The original Descenders game was one that I sunk a lot of time into, and when it was announced that there was going to be a brand new game focusing on snowboarding and mountain boarding, I was incredibly excited. Because even though the first game was fun, I have no real interest in mountain biking, whereas snowboarding is much more my kind of vibe. And I also love skateboarding, so the idea of mountain boarding was also pretty appealing. Now though, similar to the first game, you have a set amount of lives, you can gain extra lives by completing objectives, and the goal is to descend downhill and get to the finish line as cleanly as possible. Sometimes the objectives are pretty easy to hit. There's one, for example, where you have to get 5 seconds of airtime, and it's probably more difficult not to complete that objective than it is to hit it. Another one, meanwhile, requires you to reach 70 kilometers per hour, and you get up to that speed pretty much as soon as you get going. Other times though, the objectives are a little bit trickier, and there's a bit more strategy in deciding whether or not it's worth going for them, or if you just do your best to save the lives that you already have by not taking too many risks. Because as tempting as it might be to just go absolutely flat out at all times, it's not the greatest strategy in the world. Admittedly though, sometimes it's just more fun to be a little bit reckless. It's also incredibly satisfying when you're flying downhill towards the finish line and just about manage to finish without losing a life. With the snowboarding especially, I quite often feel like I'm right on the edge of completely losing control. The mountain boarding, meanwhile, probably feels slightly less intense on the whole. I feel like I have more control of the situation when I'm mountain boarding, but the trade-off with that is that it therefore feels a lot less exhilarating. Both modes have their plus points, but as time goes on, I suspect that I'll be spending a lot more time snowboarding than I will mountain boarding. Maybe that's just me though. I've always been a fan of snowboarding games, whereas I don't think that I've ever played a mountain boarding game before, so this was a new one for me. I grew up playing the SSX games, and before that, in fact, I was a big fan of the Cool Boarder series, which a lot of you watching probably never played because those games came out on the original PlayStation in the 1900s. No matter how long you've been playing these kinds of games though, Descenders Next is definitely a game that you can get some decent enjoyment out of. And if you were a fan of the original Descenders game, then you're probably going to quite like this one too. The controls feel very familiar, the premise is pretty much the same, you've just ditched a mountain bike and exchanged it for a board. I'm not sure that this game is going to have quite the same longevity though, to be honest. As I said before, I have no interest whatsoever in mountain biking, but that didn't really matter with the original game. I found myself to be more than happy going back to the same levels over and over again, and I never got tired of playing it. Whereas with this game, I don't have that same inclination to revisit the tracks that I've already conquered. I can't quite pinpoint why the feeling is different with this one, but whereas I could play the original game for hours at a time, with Descenders Next, I can put it down a lot more easily. I am enjoying it, and I do see myself continuing to keep playing it, but it definitely doesn't seem to have quite the same addictive quality as the original. I think it's quite interesting with video games that it's not always the sports that you enjoy most in real life that end up being the most appealing. When I was growing up, for example, one of my favourite games to play then was aggressive inline, and I've never even owned a pair of inline skates, let alone had any deeper interest in it. And on the subject of different sports, as I've already mentioned, currently Descenders Next features snowboarding and mountain boarding, but they do say that they're looking to add more sports later on, so I'll definitely be keeping an eye on what they add in the future and how this game ultimately ends up comparing to the competition. At the moment, both the snowboarding and the mountain boarding do feel quite similar, so it'll be interesting to see if the further sports that they add follow that same pattern, or if the other sports that they add in the future control a little bit differently. On one hand, it would be quite nice to have some variety. The negative side of that though is that if they do end up going down that route, then the game potentially never reaches its full potential with any sport, as they're having to spread their time and resources between multiple different disciplines. As I say though, at the moment, other than the fact that they're intending to add further sports, we don't really know what their plans are, so it's difficult to say how this game is going to function in the future and whether the additional sports will complement the ones that are already there or just feel like a bit of a distraction. I guess some people already have a similar complaint about this game anyway though, and would suggest that the developers should have just stuck to bikes rather than expanding to snowboarding and mountain boarding, so you're never going to please everyone. Even if you're skeptical though, I'd say that it's at least worth checking the game out on Xbox Game Pass. I probably never would have touched the original game if it hadn't been on Xbox Game Pass, but because it was on there, I ended up absolutely falling in love with it and spending a lot of time playing it. So if you're in a similar situation with this one where you don't particularly care about snowboarding, I'd still recommend giving it a go and seeing what you think of it. Will I personally spend as much time playing Descenders Next as I did the original Descenders? Possibly not. It is only in the early access stage right now though, so there will more than likely be plenty of things that change in the coming weeks and months, and that may well end up impacting how I ultimately end up perceiving the game. One thing I will say though, and this might just be me being a bit rubbish, but I can't seem to get a fast enough time on any of the racetracks. Following the route, I don't get enough speed to get a decent time. If you go off piste, you're hit with a time penalty, and whatever I try, most of the time I just end up getting silver, which is fine I guess. But with the slopestyle tracks, I know that if I nail my tricks, then Rainbow is perfectly achievable, and I'd quite like to also be able to get that on at least one racetrack. As I say though, this might just be a me issue. Maybe I'm just not built for racing. As with the original though, I do see myself coming back to this one on a fairly frequent basis, as it is pretty fun to play, and I'll definitely be keeping an eye on what they do to further develop this game in the future, as there's potential here for this to be a really solid game that people continue to keep coming back to for a long time to come. Let me know your thoughts about Descenders Next in the comments section anyway though, and if you are a fan of the original game, how do you feel about this one, and if they do end up adding further sports in the future, what would you like to see being added? Anyway though, thanks for watching, stick around and subscribe for plenty more content in the future. I recently posted a video about the new skate game, so give that one a watch if you're at all interested in skateboarding. Leave the video a like if you've enjoyed it, and yeah, I'm off now to go and play Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Maybe that'll be what my next video is about.